Hello comrades! Tetris follows the story of the video game Tetris, funnily enough, and its journey from the relative obscurity of the late 80s Soviet Union to the worldwide hit and multicoloured ice train that it is today. The story follows Henk Rodgers, who isn't the inventor of Tetris, nor is he the first to discover it and bring it to the West, nor is he the first to try and sell it in the West, but instead is a video game developer in the developing video games industry who is the first to successfully secure the rights to the game. The problem is that the inventor of the game is Alexei Pajitnov, a Russian living in the communist Soviet Union, so he doesn't own his own game. The state does. A state that's notorious for having a hammer and sickle up its arse at the best of times, but in the late 80s was on the verge of collapse and everyone knew it, possibly because their entire economy was so shithoused that cabbage water was considered a luxury. What follows is a super low stakes Tinker Tailor Soldier spy games, replete with spies, honeypots, surveillance, threats, backroom deals, backroom beatdowns, bribes and betrayals. There's even guns and a car chase in this movie about the international distribution rights for Tetris, and the deal with Nintendo to package it with their new GameBoy instead of Mario. A game about an Italian who goes to a foreign country, kills the locals and steals all their money, therefore tanking their entire economy. Credits. On paper, the story of Tetris sounds simultaneously fantastical and dull as shit, like when Star Wars started debating the taxation of trade routes, but somehow it manages to pull everything together in a fairly paced and interesting ride. Just be aware that when it says based on a true story at the beginning, based on is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. The story behind Tetris is an interesting one. There have been various documentaries about it. I've seen a few, but it is documentary level interesting. So this story about a young and hungry entrepreneur who just kind of bullshitted his way through the Soviet Union without an invitation, unaware and naive to the danger and the position he had put himself in, is an interesting one. But to make an entertaining movie, they've had to juice it a little. So now there's danger, intrigue, guns, car chases, and a sinister KGB agent intent on being a dick for being a dick's sake. The film ultimately frames the story of Tetris as a battle for its very soul by two competing systems of government. On one side you have communism, where wealth isn't as valuable as power, and capitalism, where the person with the most wealth has all the power. What follows is a whirlwind of corruption and greed on both sides to the point that they kind of look the same, and a smattering of shenanigans and near Shakespearean backstabbings and double dealings. In the middle of all this is Henk, who's like the only human character surrounded by CG creatures stampeding, somehow managing not to get crushed, mostly out of sheer luck, but also because he's the only honest person in the film, despite everyone calling him a thief, a liar and generally untrustworthy. Taron Egerton is great as Henk Rodgers, and his moustache is definitely the MVP. Also, bonus points go to Roger Allam's prosthetic-heavy, scene-chewing Robert Maxwell. As colourful as the characters are though, the core of the film is still essentially a trade deal, so car chases aside, most of it takes place in a series of offices and meeting rooms with legalese dialogue that's only one level of exciting above an application for planning permission. There are some colourful 8-bit graphics that mostly serve as establishing shots for each scene, which are nice and cute, but add to that sense that a lot of this film takes place indoors, with a bunch of dudes in suits, so it becomes easy to forget that this whole thing is set in the 80s. If, you know, this wasn't literally a film about Tetris. So in the end, there is some fun and a smattering of intrigue to be had, but if you really want to know the story behind the game, I'd recommend a documentary or podcast instead. As most are on YouTube anyway, I've linked a few in the thingamabob below. The movie itself is an Apple original and available exclusively on Apple TV+. If I was to give this film a score in Tetris blocks, well, the S and the Z are the worst, so they're in the fucking bin. The long thin one, that's the best. So somewhere in between. The T-shaped one. Yeah, that one.